Welcome to the Tai Chi Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion of the Wu style of Tai Chi. We look at Wen Zi's book. Wen Zi was a student of Ma Yue Liang. In our extended episode on the Patreon, we go into the fight between Wu Jien Chuan's son and another boxer, which you can find on YouTube. Then we return to Baiwa's interpretation of the Tai Chi Classics, where he discusses the well-known classic of 4 ounces defeats 1,000 pounds, although he gives some slightly different interpretations of how to go about that. And again, in the Patreon episode, there's a bit more about long forms versus short forms when it comes to martial arts. And finally, on the Patreon episode, we continue our discussion from the 1994 Chi Journal interview with Bruce. And he gives a little bit of the history of Neidan. And then we get to nearly the end of the 100-character tablet with Baiwa, and we talk about the self-drinking wine. And since we're getting near to the end of the 100-character tablet, we're going to release the interview we did with Bruce before we started doing the podcast about the 100-character tablet. So you can go over to the Patreon, check that out. So again, thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and take care of yourselves.
Today we're going to keep looking at the Wu style of Tai Chi. Lately we've been talking about Chuan Yu, and his son Wu Jien Chuan, from whom the Wu style Tai Chi is most well known these days. So I wanted to pull a little something from Dr. Wen Zi's book, Wu style Tai Chi Chuan, Ancient Chinese Way to Health, from 2002. One of the students of Yang Jianhou founded the Athletic Research Association in Beijing. He invited Yang Xiaohou and Yang Chengfu, the next generation of Yang brothers, who are both the sons of Yang Jianhou, as well as Wu Jien Chuan, the son of Chuan Yu, to teach Tai Chi at the Institute. This heralded a new era of allowing the public to learn Tai Chi Chuan openly and easily. Previously, Tai Chi was only taught to a limited group of apprentices in a traditional Sifu-disciple relationship. So then he shows that picture of the original graduating class. He says it's the graduation ceremony for the first Tai Chi class of the Athletic Research Institute in Beijing. And it's that picture of the Wu-style graduation, you know that one, Isaac?
Yeah, I have it on my wall.
Right, you got it on the wall right there. It's taken in 1914.
It's got the first Westerner supposedly ever did.
Right, so Wu Jien
Chi.
Chuan is in there in the middle, sort of like a big square-headed guy. That could definitely be him. There could be other famous people in this picture as well. Right, the person seated on the far right is in the same row, is believed to be the first Westerner to learn Tai Chi in China. He says this first Westerner's name was William or Williams, and he was from America, but little else is known about him. So that's that little secret history of American Tai Chi.
Right, and he's wearing a dapper-looking white suit.
Right, he looks like just your average Midwestern guy. So here's what he says about Wu Jien Chuan. As habits and lifestyles changed in the new society, both Wu Jien Chuan and Yang Chengfu modified their Tai Chi, which had been passed down from their families. So what they did is they omitted some of the jumping, stamping, and repetitive motions and made the form much softer, slower, more natural, and strictly centered. It was easier to learn and much more beneficial in its health effects. Tai Chi was originally performed very rapidly. The fast form of Yang style, as performed by Yang Xiaohou, took only 3 minutes. And the fast form of the Wu style, as performed by Ma Yue Liang, took only 5 minutes. He says Yang Chengfu's large size made his movements very open, stretched out, and generous in appearance. This style of movement is apparent from pictures of his performance. The Wu style, on the other hand, is natural and precise while maintaining a strict center. And so he mentions, like a lot of the other stories, that in the early 1930s, both Yang Chengfu and Wu Jien Chuan moved from Beijing to Shanghai and popularized Tai Chi in the south, in Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and Macau. But yeah, so what they did to modify it was take out stamping, jumping, and some of the repetitions, make it softer and slower. So that soft Tai Chi that we know may very well be a product of Wu Jien Chuan and Yang Chengfu, and in the 1930s.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely where it was popularized. I mean, I think it predated them, but it definitely was. That was when, I mean, basically it was no longer necessary really to have as many martial arts for fighting because, guns and things like that.
Sure.
So the more important, thing or the more marketable thing to do with Tai Chi especially was to market it as a, health and self-cultivation practice.
Right.
That was also a martial art, right? So the martial art part of it was kind of
secondary. But
yeah, well, I was going to say sort of like it was more done as the advanced practice, right? So
maybe.
you had to go through the basic stuff and just do the health and regular old grandma Tai Chi first, and then if you were good enough, you kind of get
in the applications.
Let
you
into
know
the
that
secret
Westerner
club.
came in 1914, so that's before they changed the form. Kind of, you know
Right,
what I mean?
right.
That's
No,
20
that's
years before.
very early, yeah.
So I wonder what his training was like, compared to 100 years later when we were practicing here. And
No idea.
Yeah, I mean, how did they do it? It's like hard to picture. Without
Well,
that
I mean,
super
that
soft
that's
flowing
where
form so key to it.
everybody, well, not everybody, but lots of schools will say, "Oh, well, we do the older version of fill in the blank form, and the more popular one is the newer version," or and it's like there's no way to trace any of this stuff really because they didn't have videos of it or
Right, it's hard to tell.
didn't even really have pictures of it until the 20s and 30s. So
especially in like English language, if whatever analysis there is pretty
right. But even in the Chinese books, they didn't start having pictures in those books until the 20s. I think I mean like that's like
Sure,
that's why Sun Wudong's books were so
they were some of the first,
groundbreaking, right? Because they had pictures to go along with
Right.
the descriptions, and you weren't just trying to figure it out from some weird two-dimensional drawing that looks like one of your notebooks,
Right.
And it's like, what is this?
a lot worse.
Yeah, your notebooks are quite good.
All right, so here's a little bit more from Wen Zi. It says, Master Wu Jien Chuan lived from 1870 to 1942. He was the son of Chuan Yu, a low-ranking military officer in the Manchurian army of the Qing dynasty. Chuan Yu learned from Yang Luchan, who held a position in the royal army as a martial arts teacher. Yang had 3 students, named Wan Chun, Lin San, and Chuan Yu, whose studious ways allowed them to attain the essence of his skills. All were Manchurian, and it was said that each acquired one characteristic skill from their teacher. Respectively, these were an energetic style, an offensive style, and a neutralizing style, which were described as the muscles, bones, and skin of the human frame. So they're attributing Chuan Yu as to having the neutralizing.
Right, so they give a slightly different
Yeah.
reason for his stuff being special or different.
Right. These are different.
So the
The one has this extra chi. One has more offensive power, and the other one is neutralizing.
right, and the other version was like hard, soft, and changing power. Right.
But yeah, regardless, there's something about those 3 guys had something special. It says, Master Wu Jien Chuan was disciplined in martial arts by his father when he was very young. During the long years of practicing and teaching, he revised and enriched the Tai Chi handed down from his family. He omitted some of the repetitions and stamping and jumping movements from the traditional forms to make them smoother and more structured. The fast form of the Wu style, on the other hand, kept the original jumping, attacking, and stamping movements. So that reminds me of the school of Ma Yue Liang. I believe they have the fast form, right?
Yeah, there's a few schools that have fast form, but I don't. Again, you have to wonder: is it a fast form that they created, or one that was the original "quote unquote" fast form? Who knows?
Who came first, or whatever. Yeah, I could see different forms being handed down over time.
Most of the fast forms I've seen, they don't. I mean, they just kind of seem like if you speed the form up a little bit and do it with a bit more
Stamping,
flicking, like a bit just flashier movements, basically, right? So
Right.
it's like
Stronger kicks and
yeah, a
stuff.
little bit more athletic, a little bit
Yeah.
more, kind of showing off the athleticism of it, not just the slowness and the smoothness of it.
right?
But you can Google.
Seems like a good combination.
You can Google Wu fast form, and I think there's two or three different versions that pop up, and it's sort of like
Yeah, I've never checked that out. So in 1928, that year again comes up, Master Wu Jien Chuan moved from Beijing to Shanghai to popularize Wu-style Tai Chi. From there, the art spread to the southern provinces. And the Shanghai Jian Chuan Tai Chi Chuan Association was founded in 1932. Unfortunately, Master Wu Jien Chuan died in 1942, which marks a great loss to the world of Tai Chi. Now, there were a couple stories we missed out of the classical northern Wu-style Tai Chi Chuan by Tina Zhang and Frank Allen. Now, we'd heard a different version of this previously, but I thought it was worth taking a look again at sort of legends of Tai Chi. So he says, among their palace guard students, the Yang family developed 3 outstanding martial artists. Wan Chun developed a high level of Fa Li, the yang or outward aspects of Tai Chi Chuan. Ling Shan was known for his skill in the strength of Liu, the drawing inward techniques of the art. A guard named Chuan Yu was the best student of the Yang family, and by studying arduously with both Yang Lu Chan and Yang Ban Ho, Chuan Yu became adept at the techniques of switching from outward hard energy to inward soft energy. This was known as transformational energy and was considered the highest level of the Yang family art. All 3 of these men were hardened Manchurian warriors whose job was to protect the persons, possessions, and real estate of the royal family. Here he describes it as, okay, so Fa Li, that's the
hard.
Right, that's the hard, right? He's attacking there. The other one's known for Liu, the drawing in.
That's the soft.
Yin. And then, Chuan Yu here is being said to kind of have both. He's got the ability to switch back and forth hell fast.
Right, which is kind of like the Bagua kind of approach to Tai Chi, right? It's not the yin or the yang, it's the line down the middle, right? It's about changing from yin to yang, not being yin or yang.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. That sounds like very flexible. So he says a little more. Chuan Yu's top students were his sons Wu Jien Chuan and another student known as Wang Mao Zai.
Right.
Wu Jien Chuan moved south, and along with Yang Jianho's third son, Yang Chengfu, developed the concept of Tai Chi Chuan practice as a health art. This development brought thousands of students to these masters and made them very rich men. Even though Wu Jien Chuan and Yang Chengfu became the fathers of Tai Chi Chuan as a health art, both of these masters were also known for their martial skill.
Yeah, they were kind of seen as the first ones to take it from just being about fighting and being bodyguards and street fighters and this sort of thing to being, okay, now it's about, self-cultivation, spreading the art so that we can help society get more advanced and, expanding awareness of native Chinese born arts that are good for people, right? You don't need to go to India and do yoga or go to America and do calisthenics. We got it right here, all packaged up in our, beautiful art called Tai Chi Chuan. Right?
Yeah. So the last thing is one last mention of the 3 main students. And the way he puts it here is he says, Wan Chun had the hardest Fa Li, Ling Shan threw people the furthest, and Chuan Yu had the best neutralizing skill. Later, Chuan Yu developed his own Tai Chi Chuan style, a transformational form that came to be called Wu-style Tai Chi Chuan.
Right, so
in here, Chuan Yu has the best neutralizing.
Which isn't that different. I mean, I guess if you're going to talk about hard, soft, and neutralizing, that's not that different than
Ling Shan, who was supposed to be the soft, he threw people the furthest. That's an interesting interpretation of the guy who was the softest. Maybe he used Liu to yank them backwards and send them flying.
Or he suckered them in and got them to fall on their faces and just threw them, when they were falling. But yeah, I mean, I always wondered, when they say, "Oh, this guy was the best at that," because who's judging this, right? I mean,
who's there?
That means somebody had to have met.
I'd like to think there's a grain of truth in there somewhere.
Right, but I mean somebody who had to have met all 3 guys and made that comparison. Right. I'm like, who made? That's the guy I want to hear from.
Right.
Who was the Jess O'Brien of the time that went around with his little notebook, kind of doing his book about all the masters.
All right, now back to the Tai Chi Chuan treatise from the Tai Chi Classics. So we left off with describing the ability to absorb and react and have great sensitivity, and that's the way to achieve invincible boxing skills. And so then I guess the book goes on to talk about, okay, that's the characteristics of this school's boxing. What about these other schools? So basically, there's lots of other schools of martial arts, each of which has its own characteristics. However, one thing they all have in common, the powerful man overcomes and defeats the weak. The slow hands lose to the fast hands. So what Baihua says is, everyone knows the strong force will defeat the weak and the slow hands will lose to the fast. But this has nothing to do with the knowledge of the correct use of physical strength. This is also the fundamental difference between the so-called internal martial arts and external martial arts, and has little to do with the tricks and forms of the action.
Right. So he's basically saying that, like, the difference between Tai Chi and most other martial arts is that it's not relying on just being faster and stronger than the other person. That it's about, being able to overcome the fact that you're slower and weaker than someone.
And that's what this whole list of things we've been learning about
right. And you do
borrowing
that,
their force
right.
and not leaning and all the alignments and all that kind of stuff.
Right. You do that by following the previously mentioned rules of, the Tai Chi Classics, right?
Right. And, I mean, it's no easy thing to be slower and still beat someone to the punch. That takes a lot of skill to pull off.
Well, you have to change what you're doing and not try to beat them to the punch, right? So instead of trying to be faster from, point A to point B, you learn how to be faster at touch. So you don't move until they touch you, and then when they touch you, you move in a way that they don't get to, their force doesn't land on you, right? So it's fast in a different way,
Because you're not trying to beat them in a speed contest. You got to be a little smarter.
No, it's not. You're beating them in a sensitivity contest, right? So you're not beating them from the point where your hand is at your shoulder to the point where you touch the other guy's hand. You're beating them from the point where when you touch hands to when something hits you in the face, right? So the idea is, if I can use your forward momentum against you, I barely have to move because you're just going to fall into my hand, right?
Right.
And this is the
you
classic.
Can catch him at just the right moment.
Yeah, and it's it's a different kind of strength, right? It's still.
So that moves us to the next thing that he says. So the next piece of the Tai Chi Chuan Lun says, if we do a careful analysis of the proverb 4 ounces defeats 1,000 pounds, it does not advocate using force to defeat others. He explains it by saying, this proverb manifests the results of applying Tai Chi Chuan's principles. It's a higher manifestation of the method of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension. It is also the concrete manifestation of the principle of making the body function like a scale. So, in other words, you're standing in a balanced posture to produce a balanced scale in response to pressure from the outside.
So this is expanding on the idea of the previous one, right? So, the idea that if they stretch their arm out, you bend it, yours. And if, they bend their arm, you stretch yours. Now you're getting into, well, if there's actual pressure coming onto your body and you're not able to just escape it entirely, you have to apply this thing of, you only let them get, the tiniest little bit of pressure on you so that even if they have 1,000 pounds behind it, none of it's landing on you, right? None of it's getting past your shirt was the way it was always put to me. That they touch your shirt, and before your shirt touches your body, you're moving, right? But you don't do anything until they touch your shirt.
Part of it, yeah, and so he talks about making the body like one of those old-fashioned scales. So the more you press down on one side, the more comes up the other. So it's in response to what comes at you. And he keeps explaining it to say that after being properly adjusted in accordance with the effect of the Earth's gravity, it's possible for one to display 4 ounces defeats 1,000 pounds instead of relying on brute force to win. So there's a gravitational element to it as well.
Well, that's that falling thing of if you can catch their body when it's kind of slumping forward because they no longer have control of their center and they're just kind of pulling forward or falling forward. That's your best chance to, exploit this.
And also,
imbalance.
if someone tries to shove you, if you're not grounded, you can't change with the force. You're just going to get toppled over. You won't be able to move and deflect that with 4 ounces. If you're too light and just sort of fluffy, you'll get knocked over. So you got to have some interaction with the gravitational direct of that downward direction to balance your upward block. Anyways, that's very Tai Chi. Once again, it's like just returning again and again to the idea of you just can't conflict, you can't clash. You've got to find that little point right where you can catch them off guard.
Your goal is not to try to get faster and stronger physically. Your goal is to get more sensitive and more Zhong Ding in a sense, right? And more able to use these different forces and different body mechanics and rely on that, not just on how fast and how hard you can throw a punch.
So he expounds on that by saying the theory of Tai Chi is that yin and yang are in harmony with each other inside the same body. I and the opponent also belong to the relationship between yin and yang. Once there is contact, it can be regarded as both of us being the same body. Therefore, the dominating side can take the initiative to adjust the interaction between yin and yang, the space, distance, and energy. So he's saying here that this yin and yang could be within myself, or it could be used to describe the interaction between two people of, the forces going between them, one being yin, one being yang at any given time.
Right. So, I mean, he's just repeating the same basic thing over and over.
I like the idea, though, that the yin and yang is 2 people now instead of just one.
Right. So you
form one body.
Right. Now the yin and the yang isn't your 2 hands or your 2 sides or your top and your bottom. It's the motherfucker coming at you and you, right? So, again, this is that thing. If he's coming forward, you're moving back. Right. And if he's moving back, you're moving forward. The thing that's in there that's I think not always clear from the writings is, again, it's about this enticement, right? So on the way in, you're just ahead of them going back, right? So I'm going back and person's coming forward, and you're just ahead of them so they can't land on you. And then when they realize they didn't get anything and they pull back, you flip it around and now you're just ahead of them on the other way. So they're essentially pulling you into them even faster, right? So, again, the real art is in making that flip from when you're going away from them to when you're going towards them. And in both cases, you're ahead of them.
So he says, when I sense that it's beneficial to my side, I destroy my opponent's balance by using the skill of 4 ounces defeats 1,000 pounds to beat him and make him unable to fight back. In fact, that is because the opponent lacks the foundation of balance. He has the power, but the power cannot be used in combination. He's finally dragged down by his own power.
Right, so right at that moment when their punch gets to its most extended, if they don't pull back, or if you're able to catch them before they pull back, this is the gap. This is where they fall forward.
They've got the power, but they can't. You're right out of reach, so the power never lands. They can't
quite. Again, I keep using this word enticement because that's what it is. It's just this it's this irresistible thing that you just want to put your hands on. So you want to get it. That's the only way I can describe it. Is it's that feeling in you when you're just like, I want to get this guy, and
I got him.
It's like you catch them thinking, I got you.
That's what I'm saying.
And you're like, oh, now I got you. And this is the like, ha thing of when you really figure out how to catch that gap. It's like, it just leaves the person dumbfounded a lot of the times because it's so.
Well, it's super apparent when you're doing like push hands or rosho with somebody who's just learning, and they're finally got it. They're like, oh, now they can pressing your arm with both their hands, going, yes, got you. And you just use like a rolling move, and it comes swinging back with a big swap, and it's like, damn it, like I had him.
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
It's an awesome feeling.
It's a lot easier when the person coming at you doesn't know your tricks.
Right. So the next section goes like this. Consider a situation that an elder person in his 70s or 80s successfully defends against many people. If he only relies on speed, how fast can it be? So that's another Tai Chi mystery. How does this unassuming old guy defending himself successfully against many people?
Right. Well, and basically he's saying an old guy's not going to do it with speed, right? Because he's not doesn't have speed. I mean, that's so that's kind of the
ultimate test, basically. Can an older person win? Because when you're old, as someone who's turning 50 in a few days, not quite as fast as I may have once been.
right. And even if you are fast, if you're smarter, you can use less of you don't need to rely on it. I mean, doesn't mean you don't have it. It's just not your main thing, right?
So Baihua says the method of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension is used to achieve 4 ounces defeats 1,000 pounds, but it also produces a relative difference of time due to the change in the relative distance of the relative space. So he's saying the same concept of borrowing their thrust, their pulling and pushing. It can make it change time itself, kind of by changing the relative distance. So he used the example of 2 runners running to the same point that's between them. But then one of the runners moves the target closer to himself, so it makes it not only closer for him, but further for the other guy to get there. So in other words, he's basically cheating.
Yeah, it's that enticement thing, right? The other guy thinks he's getting to the finish line,
Right.
and then
you're pulling it towards you.
You pull that finish line, and he's like, "Wait, I gotta keep going!" So he starts going faster, and then that's when you whoop.
So he says, if I move the center point to 80 meters away from the opponent and only 20 meters away from me, at this time I only need to run for 4 seconds. The opponent needs to run for 8 seconds. Therefore, I will arrive earlier than the opponent.
Right. This is what I was saying before about it's not the speed from the beginning of the race to the finish line. It's the speed from wherever you are to you move the finish line a couple of inches away from you, and then there it is, right? So, but this goes to that idea of folding and sort of pulling yourself into the person as they push on you, right? Because they're gonna feel like you're closer and closer to them, and then all of a sudden that is going to be a bad thing, right? The same goes if you're if you're doing your rollback and they think I got him. At a certain point, you're so far away they can't reach you, and then they realize, well, this is a bad thing, right?
Right. It was going great until all of a sudden.
Right. This is everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the head, right? You think you're essentially messing with the person's body's expectation of what is going to happen in terms of gravity, right? So the person's expectation essentially is that there's going to be resistance. There's going to be something to stop their forward momentum, right?
Like the door that suddenly opens that we keep talking about. It's like it does something to your brain when the rug comes out from under you.
So in a sense, the harder and faster they come at you, the better, because then you really only have to move the finish line a tiny little bit, right? If they're smart and they're coming in carefully and looking for an angle as opposed to just trying to use brute force, so they can still be using force, but it's not brute force, it's smarter force, right? They're trying, they're not doing just a straight punch. They're looking for an angle. They're dancing around. They're still not not messing with you on a contact level, but they're just not coming at one angle, right? Then you have to be a little bit smarter about where's the thing coming from, and you have to
a more proficient opponent, pretty much.
Essentially. I mean, but the principle doesn't change. You just have to be better at it, right? So it's not going to just be at the angle coming towards you. It's going to be coming from the side or from the back or from 2 different angles. And so, this is why you have more movements in the long form, essentially, because those teach you how to do the variations, right? And even that doesn't teach you all the variation, but it gives you a better repertoire of, well, what do you do if they punch at your head? Or what do you do if one guy's coming from over here and one guy's coming from over there? And, kind of get a little bit more of that.
You get way more variety, which should inspire you to then
go. But the principles are in the first, 5 movements, right? So it's
like a short form can give you those principles, but you need a long form to give you all the different examples to inspire you.
techniques of the applications are in the long form. Yeah.
So he ends with, so if you see a relatively weak and relatively slow old man over 80 years old who can resist several young guys, it shouldn't be surprising.
Right. Don't mess with the little old guy who's not afraid of the young guys. All right, man.
All right.
Good talking to you.
Good one.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a quick reminder to go to the Patreon and check out the interviews as well as the bonus episodes. You can also go to our Instagram and our Facebook page. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves.